All right, we're back and let's get started on the cognitive processing model of performance appraisal. Whenever you hear the word model, you know there's going to be some kind of, diagram. So, first off, we have to observe the behavior. So, it could be that, so what we're talking about, just maybe I should back up a second and say what we're talking about when we talk about the cognitive processing model of performance appraisal is that in this model, we're looking at the ways in which the person's thinking, the way that cognition occurs, can cause fault in performance appraisal. So it could be that the rater misses some important behaviors when they're observing behaviors, or that they only see what they want to see, right? They notice those things that suit their narrative and they miss those things that run counter to their narrative. These are cognitive shortcomings, right? Encoding information about the behavior. Like you'd have to, so as the supervisor, you're interacting with your employees, by day, and you don't perpetually keep marking things down. You're like trying to tick them away to store them for when it's time to do the performance appraisal. You try and remember them. Well, it's possible that you don't remember all the relevant information because maybe it wasn't thoroughly labeled enough to ensure storage, right? So, you didn't give it a good enough tag for you to be able to find it. Or maybe you labeled it incorrectly. Maybe you said this was a great example of customer service, and the truth was it was like a meh example of customer service. And so you now have this faulty memory of having witnessed great customer service when the truth was this was just okay customer service, something like that. Now, of course, once you've encoded it well enough, let's say that you did that, now you have to hold it. You have to store it for some amount of time. It's possible that some of the relevant information gets lost in that encoding to storage process. Not everything makes it into storage, right? Maybe you stored the wrong information. Maybe you were later thinking about the incident that happened out front, and you mistakenly recalled it being one employee and it really was another employee, or something like that. You mixed some stuff up. That's really common in our memories, where when you go back and you think about it again, you may store incorrect information when you go back and put that memory back where it came from. These are errors that happen all the time in memory, and they certainly are going to have an impact on performance appraisal. Let's say you encoded it correctly, you stored it correctly. Now it's time for you to remember it in time to do your performance appraisal, and now you have to retrieve what you've stored. Maybe you can't remember everything that's relevant. Maybe you can't find it all in there, right? Maybe you start pulling out information that's not relevant to this particular performance appraisal, or maybe it's not relevant to this particular employee, or maybe that's something that happened last year and shouldn't be, sort of affecting your judgments this year. So when we retrieve the information is yet another opportunity to make mistakes. And then finally, when we go to put it all together and get sort of our narrative of how this employee performs, we may make an incorrect decision because only some of the information was available, or maybe it's a biased conclusion because we have, all this incorrect information, or maybe it's because overall, even though I might have really good information stored and whatever, it doesn't really matter what I stored. I generally like this employee, so I'm going to say good things about them. Or I generally don't like this employee, so I'm going to overemphasize the negative things, even if maybe I'm blowing it out of proportion, but I want to suit my narrative. I want it to go the way I want it to go. So there's lots of opportunities for error just based on the way that we think and the way that we remember things. And so that's definitely a problem. But I wanted to get into some really common rating errors. Some of these are cognitive, some of these are more interpersonal, but some common rating errors. One is what's called the halo error, and that's where our ratings of somebody else are based on global qualities rather than individual dimensions. So the most common example of the halo error is that the person is good looking. And so then you assume all sorts of other good things about the person. You don't have behavioral evidence of that. You just assume that it must be true. A person who's good looking must have lots of friends, must be confident, must be really friendly. And so I'm sure that's what they displayed all year. I'm sure that's true. Yeah, it feels like that's probably true. And so that's how we rate the person. Even though maybe this person wasn't that friendly to the customers, or maybe this person wasn't always timely or other things, we make the error of assuming, well, they look good, they probably do good. And that's actually the correct phrase, even though the grammar is off. That's what they say in social psychology. It's the look good, do good error is another way of calling the halo effect. There are also distributional errors where so if the distribution is made up of all the possible behaviors that the employee admitted over the past year, and we're supposed to be reporting on those basically distributed behaviors, the things that they've done over the year, there are errors in our knowledge or our formation of the distribution of that person's behavior. Maybe we're too lenient. We want to look good. And so we overemphasize all the positive things that we observed across the year. Maybe we want to seem like a nice person and be liked. Or maybe we don't want to ruffle any feathers in the department, so we don't want to say anything mean. Or maybe we want the employees to like us and think that we are a good person, right? We want to look good to them. Maybe we want to look good to our superiors. So if I rate my employees in a lenient way, it might be because I'm hoping that my superior is going to think, oh, I'm such a great supervisor that I've got all these really well-performing underlings, right? So there's lots of reasons why a person might be lenient and overemphasize the positive behaviors that they might have observed in the year, and underestimate the negative ones. There's also a distributional error that assumes central tendency. The idea is we tend to start from a midpoint on whatever scale we're considering people, and we then assume most people cluster around it. So let's say back on that graphic that we looked at, it had a scale from 1 to 10, right? Most people kind of use the middle. Most people's scores will cluster somewhere pretty much between 3 and 8. Most people don't want to go out there to the 1 and the 2 and the 9 and the 10. I mean, you got to be really amazing to get a 9 or a 10, and you've got to be like awful to get a 1 or a 2. So as a result of that, we end up with what's called a central tendency error, where everybody's ratings are clustering around the middle. And so everybody looks like they're scoring basically the same as the raters hanging around the middle. It could be because they're lazy and they're like, I don't know, I'm sure they're fine, and they just give everybody 5s. It could be that maybe they don't have enough information to make, fine-tuned distinctions between a person who should have an 8 and a person who should have a 6 or something like that. They don't know enough to be confident, so they just go, well, when in doubt, I'll go with the 6 instead of the 8, right? It also could be the way that the scale is designed. There have been a lot of research studies trying to figure out how big should the Likert scale be in order to get good ratings. A 1 to 10 is probably too much, honestly. Almost by definition, people will leave off the 1s and the 10s when you have that many numbers to pick from. And a lot of people will move in even 1, and the 2s and the 9s will be dropped off also. So why didn't you just make a scale that was smaller then? Most people are going to leave that one off. Most people feel like the sweet spot is like 5, but some people don't like a middle rating because that's neutral. And too many raters will just go down the middle and give everybody a 5. So maybe you want 4 or 6 on your scale, and that way there is no true midpoint. And they have to either give a slightly positive or a slightly negative answer. They can't just go through and say neutral. So you can design the scale to reduce some of the things I'm talking about, but it's still, even with, let's say you decided to go with 5, there are some people, and I'm one of those people, honestly, I have to confess, I'm one of those people who tends to stay away from the 1s and the 5s. I figure 5 is like, okay, so if you assume the 3 is standard, like this is what we baseline, what we would expect, you're 2 levels of wow, way more than I thought to get a 5, right? Like when I was expecting 3, you not only didn't give me a 4, you gave me a 5. Like that's amazing, right? So I'm one of those people that when I use a rating scale, I tend not to use the 1s and the 5s. Nobody's so awful you get a 1. Nobody's so awesome you get a 5. So look what I have. I have a 3-point scale in my mind, right? I'm only using the 2, 3s, and 4s. So that's something that psychologists have been working on for a really long time, trying to figure out how to design those scales in a way that people feel comfortable using. One way to do it, by the way, is to do that bars design where you give actual words that are tied to the ratings, and that makes it more likely that people will pick those endpoints because those words convince them, okay, yeah, you're actually describing the employee that I'm judging. So again, I'm going to argue that it's worth the while maybe to develop those bars. The last distributional error is what's called severity, and that's where the rater is overly tough in their rating. And they might be doing it because they want to be perceived as like really tough supervisor and you can't get one over on me kind of supervisor. Some of them think that they mistakenly think that they are motivating employees, that poor scores will cause that employee to like work harder to change your mind. That is a bad idea. A lot of employees think, okay, you don't appreciate me, I'm leaving. That doesn't cause them to work harder. It causes them to leave or to actually just dial back their work. It doesn't matter what I do anyway. You don't think I'm doing well enough? Fine. Sometimes raters will want to take their employees down a notch to like reduce their cockiness or something like that. And so they will give them lower scores that maybe they don't really deserve, but they're trying to send a message. You're not all that. You're not as good as you think you are. And then the last thing I listed there was a baseline for improvement. You know, when you first start in a job, it's really normal to get middle numbers. If that system is using a scale of 1 to 5, it's very normal on the first ratings to say 3s. Maybe 3s with a couple of places where you got a 4 because you were doing so, like from the get-go, you were doing more than we were expecting in these little areas. But it's unusual to see a person who gets hired and immediately is on all 5s. Like it just doesn't make a ton of sense. But you might have a person in front of you who's really a go-getter and really trying hard and really fulfilling the goals. You still might give them a 3 because they're so new. How do you ever show that they grow and develop if you give them 5s from the first day, right? And so for some purposes, it might make sense to say, okay, this is going to be your baseline evaluation. And then we'll see, do you keep up this level of amazingness that you're doing right now so that you're continuing to exceed? Or are you even growing? Those kinds of things. But it's really important if a person is doing that as a baseline for improvement to communicate that to the person who's being rated so that they don't get, learned helplessness where they're like, man, I hit the ground running. I really was trying and you gave me 3s out of 5. You don't appreciate me. It's really important for the rater to say why they're doing it. This is your baseline. If you continue to perform as you are right now, you will see these numbers going up on future reviews. All of these distributional errors contribute to range restriction, where you just have inappropriately narrow range of distribution and actually they're not very widely dispersed. This can affect morale. If you have super high scores for everybody, the ones who are truly performing better than the others know that and they don't think it's fair. If you have really good performers and you're rating them low, that again is going to affect morale. And so, these distributional errors are not just, we don't have accurate information. It's also probably harming the morale of the organization. Some other errors I thought I'd throw in here. Recency. The most recent things that have happened tend to get overemphasized in the reviewer's mind. And so, if you have a 1-year review cycle, the things that happen in the last, well, let's be honest, probably 2 weeks are going to get overemphasized in the report. And that's kind of unfortunate because lots of interesting things might have happened in the last 12 months, but only the last 2 weeks are really being included because that's all I can really remember, right? The first impression effect, or what we call the primacy effect, it's the opposite of recency. So in this case, it's like the first things that you did, that really stuck in my mind. And even if it was something negative, it's really hard for you to dig out of my first impression. If it's something really great, it's hard for you to do anything that would downplay my initial impression that, wow, you're really great. So I'm going to rate you based on my first judgment, the first thing I thought when I met you that isn't necessarily accurate for the rest of the year and how you performed. And then there's the similar to me error, which is where raters give more favorable ratings to people who are like them. It could be age or sex or race or parenthood or not, or married or not, or share a hobby or not. It could be a lot of different kinds of things that the rater is sort of, well, when in doubt, I'm going to give my fellow archer a higher score because, boy, we were talking about archery during break and we really like it, like that kind of thing. Very biased. It's the worst kind of bias that I think we tend to think about with regard to employment, is the idea that if we're similar, you're going to like me more and promote me more and give me advantages and those kinds of things. It's like the worst kind of thing that we think about with performance appraisal and the repercussions of that. So those are some really common errors that raters make. So to try and get away from some of those problems, we're going to train our raters. So that's what we'll talk about in the next video.